Welcome everyone to another episode of Integrity Matters by Turnitin. I'm delighted today to be joined by Lucinda McKnight, who's a senior lecturer in education from Deakin University. Lucinda, great to have you with us, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you.
Could you start by just telling the audience a little bit about your background and your current position and what you specialize in, what your research interests are?
Sure. Well, I am a senior lecturer in curriculum and pedagogy at Deakin University, but I was an English teacher, first and foremost, secondary English teacher, and I've taught various places around the world. Then I did an MA, a Master of Arts in Media, Culture and Communication at the Institute of Education in London, and then a PhD in English curriculum in Australia, where I looked at teaching with digital text in the classroom and creating digital text in the secondary English classroom. Since then, I've worked in academia, and my interest is in writing. What is writing? How do we teach writing? And how do we prepare teachers to prepare students for a writing future? So that's me.
Great. And the reason why we connected, why we spoke and we set up today was around a piece, or it was started through a piece you recently published in The Conversation, which was about AI writing tools, the impact that can have on writing, assessment, and the integrity of assessment. For those who didn't read it, could you just give us sort of a brief summary in terms of what you outlined in that?
Sure. Well, while I was doing some research into teaching writing in Victoria and ways in which teachers were teaching writing, I was also doing lots of reading myself about what was happening with artificial intelligence and writing. And I just became aware of how much of what is on the internet is already being written by AI. So natural language generators, or AI writers, as they're often called, are already used in lots of industries, in the marketing industry and in journalism, to write a lot of web content. And this is just racing ahead at this incredible pace. So even between 2019 and 2020, there were huge improvements in a natural language generator called GPT-3. And so that has meant that AI, or robots, if you like, can write articles or things online that are pretty much like a human could have written them. It would be hard to tell the difference between a human writing and a machine writing. And there's been research done looking at other forms of writing too, for example, poetry, where people can't distinguish between poetry written by a robot and poetry written by a person. So things are really changing there. And yet, at the same time, in school education, I don't think we've gone there yet. That's a whole paradigm that we haven't embraced. And also in tertiary study as well, we're still looking for ways students are copying things from texts already out there, not looking at how students might be presenting texts that are completely written by robots as their own and undetectable, because they are, in a sense, original texts. So that was really what the article said.
Yeah, and you told me that it got a lot of interest from it. A lot of people reached out. Why do you think it struck such a chord with people?
I think people really hadn't realised how much this had evolved, how much it had changed and moved on. And I don't think anyone else was starting to say, well, what does this mean for education and writing? So it was putting those two things together, the developments in industry that are happening online and real world writing, and the gap or the distance between school writing and university writing. And even just in some of the research that I was doing, I got an AI writer to write a piece for me on AI writing. And it was very helpful. It was very useful. And if I was a student myself, I would be drawing on that. I wouldn't be, presenting it as my own work, but it was very helpful in terms of what I was doing. And that already got me thinking, well, what if my own students are already doing this too with, my tertiary students, with what they are presenting to me, that they're using these writers, and how should we be acknowledging them? How can we detect that they're doing this? What kind of culture are we creating around writing where this is this a threat or is this an opportunity? How do we view this? And I think this is all just open to us right now, and that's why there was so much interest.
Right. And have you actually started to introduce them or introduce the concept of them into the classroom and into your courses, or is it something you're thinking about doing, or how are you discussing it with students as well?
So I am teaching a diversity unit this trimester, and next trimester I'll be teaching an English method unit where I work with pre-service English teachers. And from next trimester, starts in the middle of the year, we will definitely be looking at AI and writing and this whole new paradigm. In terms of thinking about it, because I'm also on our faculty's academic integrity committee, I don't think we've started to think about this there either. So we'll be making some moves to start just trying to understand how students are already using this, what their attitudes to it are, and how we're all going to be able to work with these tools, if you want to call them tools, in ways that retain academic integrity, but also make the most of the opportunities that they provide for human writers.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a big challenge. Do you have any, talking about this balance, how might you do it? How might you say, could you give us some ideas of what your thinking is, or is maybe it's too early, but like how might you say or to students, okay, I want you to use a tool like this, but then I want you to, I don't know, change the outputs or show me how you've used it. I'm kind of interested in from a teaching perspective, some ideas that you might have around that.
Yeah, I think this is really early days, and so I imagine a huge amount of research will be done in the future and hopefully the near future. But so these are my guesses, my thoughts, because I will look forward to exploring this with pre-service teachers themselves, because they will have ideas about it. They will try these things out and think about how students can use it. But I think that, the way spell checkers and grammar checkers are now just integral to writing. Turnitin doesn't pick up if someone's used a spell check or a grammar check in their work, and they could have had quite substantial help from something like Grammarly in the way that they're structuring their writing and used its predictive text to formulate their own sentences and everything. In the beginning, when those sorts of things came in, teachers were skeptical about them. Teachers said things like, don't trust spell check, you need to use your own wisdom about spelling, or your own skills, your own knowledge about spelling, because that spell check can get things wrong. But now, some decades on, it's just completely naturalized in the process of writing that we'll all do that. I imagine that AI will eventually be like that it will just be an integral part of writing. And I'm drawing on what we call post-human theory here, thinking about this, that people and machines will more merge into a joint entity rather than it being seen as a separate human and a machine that does things. So I think that's going to make things very difficult for competitive assessment, which is essentially what we're all about, and why we're so interested in plagiarism, to make sure that assessment, because it's very high stakes, young people's or every student's future depends on it. How do we make this high stakes assessment fair when students are going to be potentially having all sorts of capabilities augmented by what AI can do? So I think there's no doubt that AI in the workplace is going to massively change, and it is already massively changing, say, for example, what journalism is. So we have to prepare students for that future, going out and writing in the world. And AI writers can do so much that humans can't. First of all, they will write you an essay like that in that amount of time, and they will write it in multiple languages. They will make sure it's search engine optimized in terms of its text. They will do all these sorts of things. So we've got to use them. We've got to exploit them. But then we've got this huge question, which of course Turnitin is very, very interested in, about integrity. So, yeah, I think what they will have to, chart the process, process map, if you like, what they're doing. And I don't know, I think the provenance of the information that they're using is going to become more important than ever. And they're going to need to develop their skills in critical evaluation. And that's going to be a key part. How can they evaluate what AI puts forward for them, and how can they prime AI? How can they set it up to work as well for them as it possibly can. And I think that in the future, all students are going to benefit from developing sort of algorithmic thinking that helps them understand what the limitations of AI and what it will put together for you are, and how humans can, improve that. I'm not sure if that answers the question, because it's such a whole new area.
Yeah, a lot of very interesting ideas there, for sure. I was chatting to one of our AI engineers actually recently about kind of some of his thoughts, and he similarly to you, he kind of used the calculator analogy in terms of whenever calculators came out in the 70s, and it was kind of a secret thing to do, maybe, or it was something of maybe with less integrity than doing it yourself. And nowadays, we all use calculators every day, and no one thinks to do multiplication in your head. I think writing is a bit different from that, because there's a lot more to writing than just computation, which is why it's taken a lot longer for machines to be able to do it, of course. But I think it's this idea of the AI will be a tool that's at the disposal, and for some things, it's of course you're going to do it. I think what's interesting for me, and I'd like to get your opinion on this as well, it's also about, as you say, it's about the assessment. So if we're looking at the outputs, then it's no longer, if we can no longer be sure about the who actually wrote it, where it came from, the output becomes less important as opposed to the process. And I think this, again, do you see this maybe accelerating the kind of students or working on students drafting more, showing their drafts, how they got to the process, how they got to the end state, as opposed to just that final piece of written work? Do you think that changing, that be part of the change as well?
Yeah, so that's very interesting for us, especially in the area of English and literacy, because in the history of our discipline, we have had a whole movement called process writing, where the focus was very much on drafting, editing, revising, all those sorts of things, reflecting on the process, working collaboratively with others on the process. But things like national aptitude testing in Australia, the NAPLAN program for literacy and numeracy, have shut down that process writing, made all the focus be on exams, timed writing, even for creative writing and that sort of thing. So I would love to think that it would mean a huge shift back to thinking about process, which I think would be very valuable for education. And it's essentially a constructivist sort of educational approach, where students are building their learning through going through stages and reflecting on them and coming up with an end product. That would be lovely if that was less important than the process, or even just equally important. However, my fear is that it could usher in a whole new focus on exams, and even handwritten exams, that any kind of cheating out of the question. But then there's also the potential for the writing outputs that students create, since that we can no longer be sure that they come from students, for there to be other ways of testing students. So that actual piece of work might not be marked, but the student might have to do a viva on it, an oral discussion of the concepts and the arguments that are in the piece. And so it'd be interesting if this did bring back a more emphasis on orally being able to support what you write.
Yeah. No, I could see that being the case. And I mean, I definitely agree with you. I hope that it doesn't, the idea of going to handwritten essays in a timed environment seems to be completely the wrong way to look at things. And again, I guess if you look at the maths and other science subjects, again, it's a lot about show your work, right? Show you how you got to the conclusion. And I think, anyway, from where I sit, anyway, that's a lot more valuable than focusing always on the summative aspect. I guess a broader question that interests me, and I'd like to know what you think, is obviously you're incredibly passionate about writing. In the future state of work, let's say, you've already said how AI writing is going to change things drastically. What is the fundamental? What do you think the fundamental value of writing will change in the future in terms of why people should learn to write? I'd like to get your opinion on that.
Yeah, I think this will all be evolving really rapidly. I think we've got to think, what is writing? Because traditionally, even, you know, teaching writing, we think about, you know, I just want to show you this book. This is the textbook we use for English Method, Developing Writing Teachers, Practical Ways for Teacher Writers to Transform Their Classroom Practice. And it's all about, you know, what is writing? And it's this idea of a person who's got motivations and ideas and a rhetorical purpose, you know, something that they want to achieve, some way that they want to influence an audience. And yet when AI writes, it doesn't have any of that. It doesn't know what it's doing. It's producing stuff. So we've got to think, what is writing? What's it going to be? And how do we judge the quality of writing? How do we, you know, what are these processes that lead up to a good quality piece of writing? What sorts of skills and what sorts of kind of other entities should be drawn on in developing a piece of writing? So I find it really exciting, and I think there's a lot of fun to be had with it. There's a lot of experimentation that's being done out there by artists and creative writers in particular, working with AI, that it would be lovely to see happening in the classroom as well. So I look forward to that. But I just, you know, I just hope that we don't feel really scared of this and feel like we need to shut it out and be threatened by it. But at the same time, we have to think very deeply about fairness and about integrity. And with the fairness, it's about how much these things cost, because while the free tools are readily available, to get ongoing, you know, support from this AI and really high quality AI, the better ones, you pay a lifetime or a monthly subscription. So we're on the brink of this situation where wealthy students are going to be able to pay for this AI and other students won't be able to. And that's an enormous problem.
Yeah, of course. And I think, of course, as we all see, over time, it'll become cheaper and it'll become more widely available. But for those in the early stages, some people with, you know, wealthy students may have an advantage over poor students, or just students who are more in touch with the latest happenings of technology or those kinds of things, right? Use advantages like that.
Yeah. And actually, I just wanted to say too, it's really a huge change for us as academics, because there are already loads of people out there. And I was contacted by quite a few of them with startups that are looking to write academic journal articles for academics. So I would just have an AI write my next journal paper if I wanted to. And then what are the issues there? You know, who gets credited, who gets cited, how do I acknowledge that? Because there are no real means, except for just putting an acknowledgement maybe at the bottom of a paper. Oh, I wrote this with AI, or AI actually wrote this for me in my instructions. You know, and so much for us depends on, you know, the authenticity, so to speak, of our writing. But these concepts of authenticity and integrity are going to be all up for grabs.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, actually. Yeah, and who's even going to decide how you record that, how you cite it? Because there's no global decision body that makes these judgments, right? It's going to be a fascinating thing. Something I did learn recently is, even with the latest versions of things like GPT-3, it still is possible. Humans can't do it, but machines can do it. It's possible to see that it is AI generated, and it's all to do with the way which word comes next, and it's still AI is still fairly predictable in this once you get over a certain number of words. Like a human it's more random in their word choice, and an AI still is reasonably predictable. So I think in the short term, it probably will be possible still to differentiate between AI generated and human generated. But I think that will change in the not too distant future as AI keeps getting smarter and smarter and smarter and writes more and more like a human. But
you've also got to wonder too then about if students are aware of that too. What will it take just for a student? What extent will a student have to paraphrase an AI-produced text to make it undetectable? And will students be able to work that out? And, you know,
Well, exactly. And then there's a whole question then of, is that, it's AI supported, right? It's not AI generated, it's AI supported writing, which is, again, it's, how much support do you give? But I think it comes down to how much, you know, if you're getting any external support, how much support do you get from an external editor to help you edit your work? It's always there's always it's a gradient, right? But with AI, it's just less. I guess it's just new, and it's less well known at the moment.
And that's where with the workplace. In the workplace, it's different because you just want to produce the best possible text. So of course you're going to call on AI and use it in whatever ways you can to produce the best, whatever it is, report or a business plan or if novel, whatever you're going to create. But in education, because we've got this idea of this competitive assessment and students getting scores that will get them into university and all of that kind of thing, it's potentially threatening. But at school and at university, we've also got this imperative for authentic education and work integrated learning. So we're meant to be using practices from the workplace in what we're doing. So we've got this clash between trying to be authentic and do what the workplace is doing or industry is doing with AI, at the same time as being able to fairly have students submit work that's assessed for high stakes assessment. And that's a really big clash for us, a challenge for us.
Yeah, and I guess a final thought is how quickly do you think things can change? Because often it is a huge shift in mindset and change. And do you think we'll be able to change our thinking and assessment fast enough that we won't get outflanked by the inexorable rise of AI writing, do you think? Or do you think we'll have to wait and they'll have to have such a big impact that shift will need to happen? I'm kind of curious in terms of how, what do you see the future holding in, say, 5 years or 10 years?
Well, based on what I've seen already, in particular the change between 2019 and GPT-2, the earlier version of this AI writing software, and GPT-3, the 2020 version, I think it's going to happen really quickly. And I know my background before coming into academia and in between English teaching and uni, I worked as a producer in the software industry, and I know that software development takes time. So finding ways to ensure academic integrity through software, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on coming up with solutions fairly quickly in the future.
Okay, but in terms of shifts in assessment, do you think? I guess what I'm interested in is, how quickly do you think academia can shift to accepting the need to include aspects of AI writing? Or do you think it's going to be a generational shift?
I understand how quickly can these behemoths that are universities shift. I don't think they do shift very quickly, and evidence of that is that we're not already really talking about this. Students are already using it, I'm sure, but we're not even talking about it. I think they're probably slower, much slower, but there will be imperatives that come along that force them into thinking about it, which will be, just more knowledge in the general public even about the extent to which these things are writing for us all. And people will become more and more aware of it over time, and then people will start seeing, people will start themselves or seeing their kids or using these things to create essays at university, and people will start saying, hey, that's not fair, that's not right, and something has to be done about this.
Yeah, I wonder as well, and perhaps I hope that, like as you say, it's going to be so much, industry is going to start to rely on these things more and going to embrace them more, and hopefully industry itself can sort of say to universities, as part of the in industry university partnership, say we want people to come out understanding them and being able to use them to a certain extent, and not to be seeing it as a threat, because the last thing they want is people coming out into jobs where they're expected to use AI and they're not learning about it at university as well. So I think that could be crucial.
Absolutely, and for me that relates to the curriculum as well, and the school curriculum too, the national curriculum in Australia. That makes no mention of these sort of things. Of course, we've just had a review of it. I haven't read the draft of the new curriculum, but I'm not sure that there's any mention of it in there. And then that's going to be a place for years ahead. Speaking about things changing slowly, that changes really slowly. So, where are we there? Because it's exactly the same. What are we preparing students for in 13 years of schooling we have to be able to imagine the kind of workplaces that they're going to go forward into.
Yeah. Okay, well, I can say for us here at Turnitin, we are definitely aware of the issue of AI writing. It is something that we're actively looking into, and I think there are two aspects, like you say. The first is, can you detect it, or what steps can you put in place to highlight to a teacher that AI tools have been used? But the other one, which I think is more interesting, is, okay, what does it actually mean for the future of assessment, and how can we help create better spaces for people to draft, to encourage students to draft, to make that easier to assess or build into some kind of assessment. I think there's the two sides of things, and I think my view is that it has to go hand in hand. That there's always going to be value in learning to write as a way of showing understanding, expressing ideas. As you say, building critical thinking. But that doesn't mean that the assessment has to always stay the same, and that doesn't mean that we shouldn't also be using AI writing tools. I think it has to be a blend of things in future. That's the only way that this is going to be successful.
That's a big challenge for you, I'm sure, thinking about how to work with that.
It is, yeah, but I think it's an interesting one, and I think we're in a good place to think about this with what we know about with our 20-year history, I guess, in terms of integrity and writing and essay writing and things. So I think it's a fascinating piece, and it's certainly something that's going to become more relevant. And I think I'd love to catch up in, who knows, it might only be 12 months when things change.
That's right, 12 months.
But it's going to change quickly, as you say, and I think we'll see rapid development in this space, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, let's get together for GPT-4.
Yeah.
Have a chat about that.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks a lot, Lucinda. It's been a pleasure speaking. And
thank you very much for inviting me along.